How did the Albanian Mafia go international? That's what we'll be looking at in today's episode. But before we do that, let's discuss what we actually mean when we say Albanian Mafia. So is there actually such a thing as the so-called Albanian Mafia? Well, when we talk about the Albanian Mafia, what we really mean is a group of often very separate and disparate Albanian-speaking groups. And that's another key point, is just because when we're talking about Albanian organised crime, we're not necessarily talking about people from Albania, but more people who share a common ethnicity or language. And these groups are often structured horizontally rather than vertically. So what do I mean by that? So in the mid to late 2000s, Italian prosecutors were already making comparisons with the way the group was structured, and groups such as the Ndrangheta from Calabria were structured. Members of the associates belong to the same family nucleus, to the same city, or even to the same neighbourhood. The Albanian gangs also have another characteristic that recalls that of the Calabrian clans, namely the generally horizontal structure within which only the supreme leader is recognisable, since the other secondary figures are interchangeable. So typically these groups can be made up of just a few people, and they can specialise in mainly one activity, such as, contract killing or logistics, transportation, but they work together as part of a wider network. However, a lot of gangs have demonstrated an ability to work across multiple criminal enterprises. So one example is a group known as the Compania Bello, which is probably the most established, or was the most established, Albanian organised crime group in the world. So it functioned and operated as a cartel, but was made up of 14 different Albanian gangs, each with a different role in the supply chain. It was run at the time from a cell in Ecuador by a man named Drutan Rekshepi, who'd been arrested in 2014 on drug trafficking charges, and essentially controlled the entire drug supply network from source to retail. So what are some of the defining features of Albanian organised crime? Well, perhaps the most defining feature is their ability and their willingness to cooperate with different gangs and criminal organisations from different criminal networks.
Probably the one thing that's been noticed for such a small country, the organised crime element from Albania does stretch throughout the continent significantly. What I've noticed is, unlike what you would probably see in sort of like pop culture, in movies about organised crime where there's gang wars. Sure, that still happens on, say, at a street level, but it's sort of the mid level and high level of these sort of networks. There's not really much interest amongst Albanians to sort of have the sort of classic turf war. I think their focus more is on creating mutual interests with other organised crime networks, and using the relationships they establish to grow in size, and with the intent of eventually becoming the dominant member of that relationship. And it's very, I suppose you could call it an excellent level of business acumen.
So Albanian gangs take a fairly pragmatic approach and are willing to work with whoever is best for business. Their charismatic style in dealing with potential competitors, combined with a fearful reputation for ruthlessness and violence, is considered a defining feature in their operating model. Their approach to new customers and potential adversaries is often bold but friendly, and seeks to build relationships and influence long-term arrangements. However, the undertone is that while an amicable agreement is best for both parties, the Albanian-speaking OCGs would suffer less in the event of a conflict. So again, you've got this idea of them being very willing and able to work with rival groups, but there is also that reputation for violence that they've developed, especially in their initial years of criminal activity. They're also reportedly very professional and businesslike, and a lot of reporting attributes this to something known as Besa, which is essentially an Albanian code of honour. A phrase associated with this is when an Albanian gives you his word, he gives you his son. So when they say they'll do something, they will do it. And this, again, has been a very defining feature of Albanian organised crime in reporting is they very quickly have developed a reputation for reliability. They're also often able to speak multiple languages such as Italian, Greek and English, and hold multiple identities across different nationalities, often forged. So this approach has seen them work in collaboration with other groups across the world as their presence has spread. A common characteristic with these groups is a reliance on personal or social ties. Now, according to reporting, those who originate from northern Albania prefer blood ties, whereas in central or southern Albania these can just be close or personal ties. But because of the spread of the Albanian diaspora, transnational links can still be formed without deviating from these personal or familial ties. This means that collaboration between specialised groups across multiple countries can also be facilitated along personal lines. But it also means that blood feuds or feuds between rival families can cross national borders as well. So Albania in the present day is nowhere near as violent as it was in the 1990s. However, mafia-style killings have shaken the country again in recent years. So as of November 2022, around a third of all murders in Albania in the past year were mafia-style killings. This includes drive-by shootings, targeted assassinations and bombings, kidnappings. They've all featured in reporting in recent years. And in fact, in August 2022, the Albanian chief of police was removed from his post because of a failure to fulfill objectives. Now, I mentioned blood feuds in the previous episode and rivalry between different families. This is something that is still commonplace in Albania and features within reporting on organised crime too. So, for example, in the city of Elbasan in Albania, there is an ongoing feud involving the Kapja family. So these shootings and killings have taken place not only in Albania but across Western Europe too. And it works the other way too. So feuds that take place between Albanian organised crime groups in Western Europe are often settled within Albania itself. And this is something that we'll take a look at in future episodes. So let's discuss how the Albanian Mafia spread across Europe, and more specifically how its criminal activities have spread across Europe too. So as we mentioned earlier, Albanian criminals are reported to have been working alongside the Italian Mafia since the 1990s. So the Adriatic Sea between Albania and Italy is a major smuggling route, and this led to the exchange of narcotics between the two groups. So Albanian organised crime groups would have heroin or marijuana, and they would exchange it for cocaine with Italian mafia groups, as well as for arms. Albanians are also reported to have been recruited as foot soldiers by Italian mafia groups within Italy itself, dating back to the 1990s. As part of this, some Italian groups reported to have been fairly happy to delegate some of the lower level street work to Albanians, and thus reducing the risk of being caught themselves.
Get in-depth insight on the activities of Albanian organised crime. Transnational organised crime is one of the biggest threats to security in Europe today, and the Albanian Mafia is one of the most significant organised crime groups on the continent. Using open source reporting and data from the Intelligence Fusion Threat Intelligence platform, we'll be releasing a comprehensive report on the state of Albanian organised crime groups and their impact on global security. Sign up now to receive the report as soon as it's released. Click the link in the description below.
Other connections are said to have been made in prison, so there are around about 2,300 Albanian nationals in Italian prisons. And this is reportedly where a man by the name of Arben Zogu, who reportedly was responsible for starting the flow of Albanian-controlled cocaine into Rome, first met and collaborated with a member of the 'Ndrangheta by the name of Rocco Belloco. Now, over time, the Albanians proved themselves to be reliable and effective workers and began to essentially climb the ladder within these organisations and become medium to high-level actors. Now, in the present day, many Albanian criminals are reported to be equal partners with Italian mafia groups such as the 'Ndrangheta. From the late 2000s, Albanian criminals began to arrive in Latin America to act as emissaries on behalf of these Italian mafia groups. The 'Ndrangheta in particular had extensive links with the cocaine trade in Latin America, and had control over a large proportion of the European cocaine trade. These emissaries were tasked with making contacts, securing deals, or acting as guarantors for shipments. However, as well as working as emissaries on behalf of other groups, a lot of Albanian criminals began to settle in Latin America themselves and set up their own networks. So these countries include Colombia and Peru, where cocaine is produced, as well as in transit countries such as Ecuador, Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela, and others. So within these countries, they've begun to form extensive contacts with local groups to act on their behalf. At the same time as this, Albanian groups were beginning to form in destination countries for the narcotics trade in countries such as the Benelux countries, so Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Apparently, there are around about 15 different Albanian groups with ties to 3 or 4 Albanian groups based in Latin America. Now, these groups have become important parts of the supply chain as they're able to secure shipments of cocaine from the ports of particularly Rotterdam and Antwerp, which record the largest seizures of cocaine in Europe. Now, while there is growing violence associated with the drugs trade in these cities and within these countries, reportedly Albanian groups are actually working in cooperation with Moroccan groups, Belgian groups, Dutch groups, and others, rather than forming part of this cycle of violence, again, with the exception of settling their own scores amongst themselves. Now, another key destination point for cocaine from Latin America is the port of Hamburg, which has been attributed to the presence of Albanian organised crime groups in that city, and they're also based extensively within Germany itself. Albanian criminal groups in Germany are also involved in the marijuana trade, not just from Albania, but from countries such as Spain, where Albanian groups have set up marijuana plantations outside of Albania. And Spain is another country with a significant presence of Albanian organised crime. So as well as the ports of Rotterdam, Hamburg and Antwerp, the ports of Algeciras and Valencia are also key destinations for cocaine. Additionally, a high-profile Albanian figure who was recently arrested for money laundering and drug trafficking charges in Mallorca is said to have significant links to the Albanian groups in Hamburg. We've also seen Albanian groups setting up human trafficking networks within Spain. So, for example, in October 2022, Spanish and British police dismantled an Albanian human trafficking network which was shipping Albanian migrants from Bilbao and Santander into the UK via the ports of Portsmouth and Southampton, either through ferries or shipping containers. Speaking of human trafficking into the UK, Albanian groups have reportedly gained a strong foothold in northern France, and this has led to a rapid increase in the number of Albanian nationals being smuggled across the channel on small boat crossings. Historically, they've also been involved in people smuggling through the ports of Calais and Dunkirk into Dover through roll-on, roll-off traffic such as lorries. Now, within the UK, Albanian groups have established themselves as the dominant players in the cocaine trade. They are said to be the major suppliers in pretty much every urban centre in the UK, with the exception of Liverpool, where local groups have their own supply of cocaine from Latin America. They're also increasingly dominating the marijuana trade in the country and are reported to have displaced the Vietnamese as the number one controllers of marijuana production within the UK. As of October 2022, there were more than 1,300 Albanian criminals within the UK prison system, which is more than any other foreign nationality. Closer to home in Albania, they also have a major presence in Greece.
Most Albanian groups in Greece are involved in the distribution and transportation of drugs, especially cocaine, cannabis, and heroin. They control the majority of the arms trafficking in Greece and import weapons, including handguns, military-style weapons, and grenades. Most members of the groups are armed, They own weapons and a large amount of ammunition. Albanian groups control about 50% of the sex trafficking of women in Greece, with almost absolute dominance in Athens, while participating in the sex trade in all major cities across the country. They are involved in the trafficking of immigrants, along with the forgery of documents, which assists often irregular immigrants to enter Europe. Albanian networks are also hired for contract killings and provide hitmen to other organized groups, including the Greek Mafia. The groups also control the prisons in Greece, so even if members are arrested, they can continue running their operations from inside.
Albanian groups are involved in people smuggling from Greece into Western Europe through the West Balkan route. Albanian criminals have been known to frequently hold Greek passports as well, whether fraudulently or legitimately. They've got close connections with groups that operate in the West Balkans in general, so Macedonian groups, Montenegrin groups, Kosovan groups, and as we've mentioned, there's often a lot of overlap between these two groups. Now, increasingly, they're using their connections in Latin America, their presence in Europe, and their control of parts of the country in Albania to establish a new cocaine trafficking route directly to Albania from Latin America. And the port of Durrës in particular has shown up in reporting on this. Now, using their connections in Albania and across Europe, they then distribute the cocaine from Albania back across Western Europe. And then finally, we've got Dubai, which is potentially the logical endpoint for the spread of the Albanian criminal diaspora. Now, within Dubai, they're not engaged in any direct criminal activity. Rather, this is where they go to enjoy the spoils of their trade. So an example of the multinational approach to Albanian organised crime can be seen from an Italian police operation in 2018 called Operation Black Eagle. Now, that operation focused on cocaine being trafficked and sold in Rome. So this network would traffic cocaine from Latin America to the port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. From the Netherlands, they would use local Albanian groups to remove it from the port and then distribute it across Western Europe. To do this, they would use cars that had been specially modified in Madrid by a Colombian organization, and then when it reached Italy, they would sell it to Italian buyers to then sell it in Rome. So you can see the transnational approach that they're taking here, the multiple different foreign groups that they're working with, the local actors that they've developed relationships with, and the different methods that they're using to traffic cocaine from source through to retail.
What the Albanians have been able to do is essentially provide muscle, for lack of a better term, and in doing so, they've actually been able to improve their understanding of how a lot of drug trafficking and human trafficking and all various other sorts of illicit activities work, and improve their own capabilities as a result.
So while Albanian organised crime groups are involved in a myriad of different criminal enterprises, over the coming episodes we'll be focusing on 3 criminal activities in particular. Now, these are human trafficking, marijuana trafficking, and cocaine trafficking. Now, each of these 3 trades, they've become some of the most dominant players in transnational organised crime. So in the next episode, we will be discussing human trafficking and how that supports their operations across other criminal enterprises.